2 additional years studying hermeneutics and literary theory at Liberty Institute in Switzerland. This particular topic is not necessarily within my expertise, nor is speaking publicly or debating publicly, so I appreciate you bearing with me if I have to take an awkward pause in between responding to any of your statements, or if anything goes over my head. I will do my best, though, to present a cogent and persuasive case for determinism. Let's see. I hope to convince you not only that your belief in your own free will is irrational and incoherent, and in fact delusional. In addition to this truth of determinism that I hope to convince you of, I also hope to convince you that you don't have to throw out all the babies with the bathwater when you get rid of this fallacy of free will. All the beliefs you hold and cherish dear to your heart do not necessarily have to be abandoned just because this concept of free will is rather intimately interwoven into so many of the beliefs that we hold dear and so many of the beliefs that we carry on a daily basis. I think I should probably take a moment now to define what I mean by free will so that we all know what we're talking about. What I mean by free will is what I think many would consider the classical or popular definition of free will, and it has 2 main thrusts, and each with a corollary assumption that is somewhat built into it. The first real thrust of the notion of free will is that you have active agency over your decision-making process, that you are not only the origination and proximate cause of your decision, but that you are in control of that whole process. And one of the assumptions that is derived from that, and seems to hold true in most of these conversations, is that you are not only the active agent of these decisions, but you are aware of all the mechanisms and processes that go into the decisions that you make. The second main thrust of the concept of free will is that given the opportunity to go back to that point in time when you were going to make this choice, you could have potentially made another choice. And it's from this idea that we derive the other assumption that you are therefore responsible for every choice you've made, and that you bear the responsibility for not making the other choice if it yields bad results, or vice versa. And obviously, I'm sure there will be some people who have different definitions of this concept of free will. Maybe you want to nuance it, maybe you want to massage it one way or the other, but I don't have that much time, so I won't try and address all the concepts of free will. But this is the main notion that I'll be addressing tonight. And I'll just get right to it since I don't have tons of time. I want us to all participate in a thought experiment, if I may. I want you guys to think in your head, if you believe that you have free will, I want you to think back into your history, your own personal experience, and choose any such decision that you think best exemplifies these notions of free will we just discussed. So to reiterate, I want you to think back, cull through your memory, and find one such choice where you were the active agent of that decision-making process. And not only that, but you know why you chose what you chose. Additionally, going back to that choice, you could have made a different choice, and that you were responsible for the outcome of that choice. I'll give everyone a moment because I know you have a lot of choices in your past, and I really do want you to have an opportunity to select the best showcase for your free will for this experiment, so I'll give you just a moment. Okay, so now I want you, does everyone have this decision in your past, in your mind, in the forefront of your brain? All right. I want you guys to imagine that I've handed you all out an imaginary questionnaire form, and I want to find out about this decision. I'm assuming it's a rational choice, right? We're gonna stick with that. We're not gonna have irrational choices in this experiment. So if you did select an irrational choice, start over and go back and find a rational one, because that's really what we're talking about. I would imagine that's the type of free will choice that you want to defend here.
What if I can't defend any of my choices?
What if indeed, Justin? What if indeed? Now, so I want you to imagine that I handed out this questionnaire to you, a mental questionnaire, and I'm going to give you some blanks, and I want you to fill in those blanks about the characteristics of your decision that is presumably free. First thing, All right, the first thing I want you to tell me about is what were the available options for you to choose from in this choice?
Cake, no cake.
You know, it might have been a door A, door B. It might have been I'm going to do something or I'm not going to do something. It could have been 31 flavors of Baskin-Robbins and you have to pick one or a combination of two. Whatever it is, think about the subset of choices that were available to you or occurred to you to choose from. That's question A. Question B, I want you to tell me about the information that was available to you at the time of this decision. Not after the decision, but at the time when you actually made the choice. You had a set of past experiences. You had a set of acquired knowledge. You also had a set of influences and values that you came into contact with, presumably. Some you adopted, some you ignored. But whatever those were, think about up until that moment of the choice, what were those subset of past experiences that played a role in your decision-making process, this rational choosing freely. Now question C, I want you to tell me something about your own mental and physical state at the time of this decision. Maybe you were sober, maybe you weren't, maybe you were tired, maybe you were well rested, maybe you were stressed out, maybe you were tranquil. Whatever it may be, you had a given state at that moment of decision. I just want you to conceive of in your mind, to the best of your recollection, what that state was. Alright, now finally, I want you to go back through this list, A, B, and C, and tell me, over which aspect did you have active agency? What factors that played a crucial role in your decision-making process were actually a manifestation of your will? And what control did your will exert over any of those factors at that moment of your decision being made? I suspect that the answer is none. I suspect that none of you had the ability to control the context in which your decision was made. And so when you claim, excuse me, let me back up. I think it's fair to say that with option A, life rarely does give you options like door A and door B. Usually choices are much more complicated. But nobody here, as far as I'm aware, has the ability to, through sheer exertion of their will, create an option, an additional option for that choice, right? So you are given a set of choices that you must choose from, and that is not within your control. Nor do you have agency over your past experiences. This includes every event that is in the past and for all intents and purposes, is concretely locked and set in history. You don't get to change the memories you have or the choices that you've made in the past. Additionally, you don't even get to choose which memories you remembered, right? That would require you to remember them before you remember them, which is clearly a logical regression ad infinitum. Nor can anyone here, through their agency, change their physical state of being at the time of that decision simply by willing it. I think this would certainly make it easier if you're trying to decide whether or not to drive home after a couple nights of drinks. You could say, oof, I'm too intoxicated to make this decision. I'm going to will myself to be more sober and have better faculties of reason to make better decision-making process, or a better decision. I think Schopenhauer put it very well when he said that man is free to do what he wills, but he is not free to will what he wills. Again, this is an infinite regression, where you will what you will before you will it, ad infinitum. I think that what is being claimed when you claim that you have a free control over your decision, this is an example decision in your mind, presumably, what you're really saying is that your decision is either unaffected and disconnected from the context in which the content of that decision was made, which is an irrational decision, or you're saying your decision was affected by the context, which was outside of your control, but in fact, it was within your agency and control to change the context surrounding your decision, not just the content.
Can you say that one more time for the crowd?
Right.
No, it was good.
It's just a back on that. Yeah. So what is being claimed when you claim that your decision is free is either that the content of your decision is disconnected from the context of that decision, which is clearly outside of your control, And because it's disconnected from any reason or cause outside of yourself, it isn't necessarily irrational. It is a roll of the dice. It is disconnected from the world in which this decision is being made.
Random.
Or you're saying your decision is free because you do have control over the context and these other factors that play a crucial part in every decision you've ever made, especially rational ones.
Can you give some examples of these factors that you suppose you have control over?
I can't give you an example of any factor that you have control.
Your life experiences up to that point, where you
Right, so
geographically are.
Like the
Perhaps-
weather. that
Perhaps
day.
someone gives me a
that
challenging
morning.
question or a decision that I have to make, and my mind comes up with these examples that are relevant of either from my past experiences, knowledge that I've accrued up until that point. But I don't get to claim responsibility for choosing those thoughts. Because again, that would require that I think those thoughts before I think them.
You don't choose your thoughts.
Yeah, so insofar as your thoughts play a crucial role in your decision-making process, you cannot claim they are your own. I don't know if anybody did watch that Sam Harris talk that he gave. I'm trying very hard to not just, follow Sam Harris's footsteps. Even though I think he gives a very good lecture, very persuasive on it. He says, thoughts just appear in your consciousness. Haven't you noticed? They just bubble up to the top. And we feel, once they bubble into our consciousness, as if we are the author of them because nobody else is around to take credit for it. But in reality, if we are claiming to own them, to be responsible for their origination and the proximate cause of these thoughts, that would require either that we think them before we think them, or that our thought process actually take place in a not material organism like our brain. I think Descartes actually held this belief very strictly. He proposed a dualism of mind and soul, where he said, the mind is physical and subject to causality, but the soul is actually a disconnected entity which has a conduit with our body, and the pineal gland is what he believed. And that's why our soul and our decision-making process is actually outside of the realm of causality. I don't really find that claim very persuasive. Maybe you do. I don't know.
Spaghetti monster.
Spaghetti monster, right? In this dichotomy of either your choices being disconnected from the context and being irrational, or being connected to the context and that context being under the purview of your control, means you are either crazy or supernatural. You are either crazy or an uncaused causer at every decision. Unless you are supernatural, and unless you have a godlike ability to control and change the context of your decisions, I don't believe you can coherently claim that those decisions exist outside of causality. At this point, you might be thinking that my arguments depend strictly upon a strict materialistic view of the world in which we exist and human beings and the choices. But I don't think it necessarily does, because even if we say that our decision-making process actually is connected to some soul or some extra physical part of ourselves, because we are more than the sum of our constituent parts, I don't think you can claim responsibility for the soul that you have. I don't think you chose it, any more than you chose your DNA. So where does the responsibility come in there? It's true that we know very, very, very little about how the brain works. But the more we learn, the more we understand that what we consider to be ourselves, our identity, our will, and our consciousness, the more we understand that our identities are inextricably woven into our physical bodies. The brain is not a magical conduit to some super-causal world where our decision-making processes sidestep the law of causality. I think just like every other organ in our body, if an artery in your heart gets clogged, your heart stops to function properly. If the brain develops an aneurysm or a tumor, it too will cease to function properly, and along with it, your faculties of reason, your faculties of choice get affected. So many things can change just by a brain tumor being pressed up against your amygdala. It can cause increased aggression. It can cause a fascination with violence towards strangers. And people have reported, in very famous cases even, that they have these urges that they neither agree with nor understand, and yet they follow through on them because they are compelled to by some exterior force impacting their physical brain. So I don't think we can situate the decision-making process somehow outside of the physical realm or outside of physical organisms. And if it is not outside of physical organisms, how can it exist supercausally? How can it somehow magically sidestep this law of existence like a law of gravity? Now, some of you might argue that the advances in quantum mechanics mean that really the universe is structurally indeterminate in nature, that we don't live in a world of causality. But I think this is similar to saying that because gravity behaves weird at an event horizon in a black hole, I don't experience gravity in my existence. I think it's a similar logical jump. And even though causality is confusing to us on the quantum level and there's indeterminacy there, we still experience and assume causality will play out in every aspect of our life. When we make decisions, it is because of the reason that we believe causality will bear true, that this cause will bring about that effect. But we want to sidestep just this spark of decision and say, oh, that's not in the causal world. But the effects of that decision is in the causal world. I have yet to hear, in all the philosophy I've studied, a cogent explanation of how that works. I mentioned at the beginning that abandoning the delusion of free will does not require that you throw out the baby with the bathwater. And this is what I mean by that. You can still retain a belief in the non-aggression principle without assigning responsibility to every individual, because it is still the best way to bring about prosperity and avoid suffering, whether or not people are responsible for the choices in that system. You can still learn truths about human behavior from the praxeology of Austrian economics without pretending that we are all supernatural God choosers. I really have no doubt that this will come up in the conversation. I'm sure somebody wants to talk about subjective value theory. In fact, I'm sure someone has no choice but to talk about subjective value theory.
Damn it, you're right!
Prove me wrong, don't bring it up. No, but we'll get to that later. But what I'm asking you to do is separate your views that you care about, these babies, from the dirty and useless bathwater that they're sitting in, which is this belief in free will. Because also mixed in with that bathwater is some nasty stuff that you probably don't want to hold on to, but which is necessary if you do hold a belief in free will.
STDs.
Like STDs, thank you, STDs.
It's all that floaty shit in the bathwater, yeah.
Mixed in with that bathwater is this insidious notion that we ought to worship and venerate a psychopathic God that is all at once capable of ending suffering but chooses not to on a regular basis, because he saw fit to also give us each an equally godlike ability to make choices and bear responsibility for them. I think it's more than ironic that in assigning ourselves the responsibility of free will, we somehow magically remove the responsibility from an omnipotent God. I think also mixed in that dirty bathwater is the justification for terribly immoral actions that our government carries out, such as putting a human being in a cage, sometimes for the entirety of their life, not for a violation of the non-aggression principle, but because they broke a law. Even if it was a victimless crime, because there was a willful violation of the law, and they must bear the responsibility for that. I also want, as a side note, I want to note that the deterministic worldview is more than justified in preventing an individual from violating the NAP against you. Just like I don't have to assign free will to an AIDS virus to wear a condom. It still will get you sick, and it is still worth taking prophylactic measures against contracting it. Whether or not you think it has free will and responsibility for its actions, it will do it to you. I think determinism asks that you care deeply about your choices and endeavor to make the best decisions that you are able to, but it also asks that you replace pride in your accomplishments with gratefulness in your circumstance, that you replace an egotistical belief in your own godlike powers with humility and recognition of your subjective limitations. I think it asks that you replace hatred for those who have hurt you with compassion, understanding, and sometimes even forgiveness, even when you are the person who has hurt you. Yeah, I think some of the babies that you hold dear will change when you throw out the dirty bathwater they've been sitting in. I think they will have the opportunity to dry themselves off from the logical fallacy that have kept them so wet. And I think that is a change for the better. I thank you.
All right, give it up.